Hello, my name is David Hartful with Black Leadership Analysis, and I'm here with Miss Wanda Mosley of Black Voters Matter. She is a Georgia organizer that was instrumental in the election of Ossoff and Warnock in Georgia. And we're going to do a full rundown today of the Black voter suppression and how it specifically affected Georgia. So I'll start by asking Miss Mosley if you want to add to the introduction and what your organization does.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience. My name is Wanda Mosley. Today, I am the National Field Director at Black Voters Matter Fund. Previously, I was the Georgia Senior State Manager, overseeing all of our work up until about January, maybe 10th or so of 2021, after the historic Senate runoff races in the great state of Georgia. I'm happy to be here to talk about the work that we do at Black Voters Matter. We are a power building organization. We are working diligently to build Black political power. We choose to do our power building in electoral spaces because we know that that serves as a form of harm reduction for our folks. We like to tell people, don't let the middle name confuse you. Yes, we're Black Voters Matter. We are intentionally named Black Voters Matter because we are here to build power with Black voters. And we are not Black Votes Matter because, votes are a separate thing, whereas voters are our people, our cousins, our aunts and uncles and them. So we are here to work with our folks to build this much needed Black political power.
Yes, and I love the idea of adding the humanity back into the struggle and not making it just a numbers game. So how did you first get started in activism? What was your first action, I would say, that you consider part of community building?
So if I may have a guest privilege, I like to tell the story of my first lesson of organizing. It actually came at probably about the age of 5 or 6. I was a little girl in Paducah, Kentucky, and my godparents had some dogs. These were beagles, and they had just had puppies. And so I can remember just being completely enamored by the puppies, little tiny dogs, and being literally in the doghouse with the puppies and seeing the puppies, do what puppies do. They had some hay in the doghouse. It was their little bed. They would fall off the little hay bed. And so I decided that each puppy needed his or her own bed because, they knocked each other off the bed. And so as I started putting each puppy in its own bed, I noticed that they kept congregating back together. And so I learned the lesson from that I realized, decades later, is that it's not so much what I want for them, it's more so what they need. And so as an organizer, I have to respect and learn and know that, my wants and wishes can't be centered. It has to be what the people want and need. And people closest to the problem are the ones who know the answers to the problem. And so that was my very first lesson in organizing that I realized, like I said, days later. But to directly answer your question, I got involved in activism in this, current form of activism in about 2014, I guess it was. So I'm still relatively new in the activist space, but I've always been somebody who believed in voting, believed that there was power in voting. My great grandmother, Ollie Mae Charleston, worked at the polling precinct at the elementary school that I went to in Seattle for upwards of 20 years. So I think, voting and elections are in my DNA.
That's good. That is awesome. Oh, man. So I really want to make sure we get a good rundown of how the voting suppression started. So I'm going to do a little background. So in the 2012 election, Black voter turnout by percentage was higher than white voter turnout. So in 2013, the Supreme Court got to hear the case Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder. Okay. So this decision of the Supreme Court removed Section 4B from the 1965 Voters' Rights Act. So when they went to trial, they went on trial contesting 4B, and 4B says that any precinct with less than 50% voter registration in November 1st, 1964, has to be subject, if they make an election law change, it has to go to a federal commission to be approved. And the Section 5 was the actual federal commission. So they couldn't get Section 5 removed, but they got Section 4B removed. And their argument was that since the criteria was November 1st, 1964, there would be no way to ever get off of the list. So they would be just on this list perpetually. And then the voting laws in their state would be, in their county, would be different. They couldn't make any changes, whereas somebody in Delaware or New York could. And, but I actually listened to the Supreme Court closing arguments. And one of the things that people, the judges said was, RBG actually said, I think it was either RBG or Sotomayor, I can't remember which one now, but she says, whatever other criteria you would make for now, Shelby County, Alabama would be under that same thing. So like one proposal would be to, if you've closed a certain percentage of polling stations, then you have to get stuff reviewed. Well, Shelby County violates that. So any of the modern day ways of voter suppression, the Shelby County does all that. So they would have been still watched anyway. And so the 65 bill specifically was addressing the literacy test. So in 65, they would take you to, if a black man went to go vote, they would ask him something like, well, who was the governor 20 years ago? And hardly anybody would know that unless you're just a complete political junkie. Or some really hard question where they have to explain a Supreme Court decision, which most people can't do. And if a white guy came, they just asked him to spell cat or something. So Alabama was trying to say that they don't do that anymore and things are fine. But what happened was it got more nuanced, and the suppression got more nuanced and it got more sophisticated. So that was the difference. So Brian Kemp was the governor around this time. I can't remember the exact date he started. But he made a lot of changes in the voting rules as the Secretary of State. So in Georgia, the Secretary of State is above the elections. And so what they said was he actually canceled 1.4 million people off their voter rolls. And the 1.4 million people they canceled was based off the database that's known to have many errors. He actually purged 500,000 people on one day, July 28th, 2017. And he targeted people that voted in the 2008 Barack Obama election and then didn't vote again, because a lot of black people registered just to vote for Barack Obama. And he had a feeling at the time, I don't know if Stacey Abrams had fully announced, but he had a feeling Stacey Abrams would run. So by purging all the Obama voters, that's going to be something that's going to negatively impact Abrams more than Kemp. So the AP found 70% of the people affected by the polling was blacks. That's the AP Press. That's a nonpartisan group.
Yep.
Polling places in predominantly black districts were closed and had long lines. They had this charge of voter fraud on the machines in Fulton County. So it reduced and Fulton County is where Atlanta is, where the large black population is. So when they were voting, they were down 1/4 of the voting machines that they needed. And they also had this thing called the exact match law, where your signature on your voting registration has to match exactly all your other documents, or it could be thrown out. And this disproportionately would affect people of color, especially Latinos, who often have hyphenated names. So sometimes they might sign their full hyphenated names and sometimes they don't. And 214 polling stations were closed from 2012 and 2018 in mostly black areas. So I want to ask you, in 2013, what was your job then? Were you involved in voting in 2013, or did you get involved deeper once you saw the 2013 ruling?
Yeah, so I was not involved in voting rights work in any way, shape, or form in 2013. I do recall hearing that and seeing that on the news, just because I am, probably what's known as a super voter. I vote in every election. And I just remember hearing it and going, oh, this is not good. Why are we tinkering with the Voting Rights Act from 1965. And initially I did think that it was tinkering. But then I later learned, wait a minute, you just gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And mainly you do so because Black people are voting at having high voter turnout. So like, oh, well, clearly we don't need any of this anymore. Black people can vote. Racism is over. Yay. Come on, Black people. Welcome to the party. And that's crazy. So I was not aware at that level. I worked in sales and marketing in the beverage industry, in all honesty. So it wasn't anything that was on my radar. But I did begin working with the New Georgia Project on a full-time status in 2015. I had done one project in 2014 and then started working there full-time in 2015. And so that's when I started to learn about, the Shelby versus Holder case and the implications there. To your point, we're still living under that long shadow today in 2022.
Exactly.
So, it was interesting. You brought up exact match. I do remember that very well. Several organizations, the New Georgia Project, Coalition for the People's Agenda. It's important to note that at that time, Black Voters Matter didn't exist just yet. And so I remember the lawsuit that was filed against the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. And then I remember late in the year in 2016, maybe it was after the election, maybe it was December, him basically saying, oh, you know what, you can drop the lawsuit. I'm going to take it out. We're not going to use exact match. And he did that knowing full well that in the legislative session that started weeks later, it would be implemented into law. So he didn't have to, he basically avoided the lawsuit, but knowing that it was still going to be in use. So those are the kind of tactics that we're up against in Georgia. These people are real slick. They're very strategic in their work.
Exactly.
And that exact match system, if memory serves me correct, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a study that showed that 62% of the people who were disqualified as voters under exact match were actually African American. So you raised a really good example of our Latinx brothers and sisters with the hyphenated names, oftentimes carrying the mother's name and the father's name. Black people were still more affected through that. And look, let's be clear. Brian Kemp knew full well Stacey Yvonne Abrams was about to run for governor.
Yeah.
So he was all over that. He was everything he could from his seat of power as Secretary of State to as the chief administrator of elections to stack the decks in his favor. So it's crystal clear to us.
Well, I mean, exactly. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that you could run in an election where you set the rules for the election before they start.
Yeah, participant and referee, I think is the way many people described it.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you're literally, you're playing against the ref and you wonder why you're losing. Like,
yeah. And, if we really want to think back to that, the Republican primary for that election, Brian Kemp would not have been the Republican nominee were it not for, and I don't know why I can't think of his name right now, the front runner at the time, the person who was leading in the polls. I can see his face, but I cannot think of his name. But there was another candidate who was further down in the polling, maybe fourth place or so, had a conversation with why can I not think of his name? Maybe you can look it up while we're talking.
I'm doing it now.
Yeah. He had a conversation with the person who was leading in the polls. Unbeknownst to the other candidate, he was recording the conversation. And I believe it had to do with funding for schools. And he just made some real outrageous comments about that. And he tanked in the polls. His candidacy was basically over. And it wasn't until that recording was released that Trump actually endorsed Kemp. He had not endorsed Kemp up until that point. So he would have been stacking the deck for somebody else, which, over there is party over country. So on some levels, it really didn't matter. But yeah, he did all that. And he wasn't even going to be the nominee were it not for that slip by that other candidate.
Man.
Yeah. If it were not for him showing his true colors. Yeah.
That's wild. So let's go over what went on in Georgia specifically. So I got an itemized list here. They reduced ballot boxes in mostly Black and Latino neighborhoods. They shrank the window for early voting. So a lot of times they'll say that the voting window in Georgia is longer voting window than Delaware. But they specifically took away weekend voting when Black people were using souls to the polls to get to it. So it was something specifically targeted on the days where a higher percentage of Black people voted. And let's be real, if you're a working person, everybody doesn't have the kind of job where they get paid time off.
Right.
So if you're a working person, you're more likely to vote Saturday and Sunday early anyway. So it really does hurt all working people. Another thing I didn't understand, you have to have your driver's license or state ID number on the outside of the envelope when you mail-in ballot.
You mean back then or today? Today. We have to include a photocopy of the ID, which is a relatively new law, which is also burdensome and cumbersome to folks. But, we know that that's intentional, right? That is to discourage Black people from using vote by mail, which, up until 2020, overwhelmingly was used by white voters. So it was perfectly fine when white people were using it. And then it's like one of those things where, Black people found out about it and said, oh, well, we got to shut this thing down. It's wrought with fraud and we can't trust that. Oh, my goodness. It's awful. Ooh, no, you shouldn't be doing that.
And voter ID laws are superfluous because when you get your voter registration card, you show your ID and proof of residency to get your voter card.
Exactly.
So at that point, your voter card is a form of ID, just like your social security card is a form of ID.
Exactly. So, I made that same argument to somebody else who they continue to say, well, you have to show an ID. You need to show an ID when you go and vote or when you apply for your ballot. Why? We've already verified that. That's already been done. That's a process of becoming a registered voter. That's taken care of. So you're now placing a burden back on voters, asking them to prove themselves again. And so, for some folks, that's why Georgia tried to implement, when Georgia implemented having a government issued ID necessary to vote, the NAACP sued Georgia and saying that, well, you can't make people pay for that. That's another burden. Exactly. That's a poll tax. Yeah. So we do have our friends at the NAACP to thank for that. Otherwise, Georgia was going to make people pay for it. Now they have to offer a free government issued ID for purposes of voting only.
So we got another thing they did was mobile voting was outlawed in Fulton County, which is the Atlanta district. And mobile voting was actually a mobile bus voting station they would take to neighborhoods and let people vote. And it was all the rage because you have this big new high-tech bus coming to your neighborhood and people were just curious naturally. So because they were curious naturally, it increased voter turnout. We talked about the removing of Sunday voting in the elections. And this is the worst. Going forward, the General Assembly, which is the Georgia State House and Senate together, picks a person to lead the elections, not the Secretary of State. And the General Assembly can take over election boards. So at this point, they could just literally overturn elections if they want to, which is just no way that's constitutional. I mean, I really don't see why the NAACP hasn't taken that immediately to court, because they can just overthrow an election without proving there's a lot of fraud. I mean, that's ridiculous.
It's very ridiculous. And, the other part that they have, so they have taken a lot of powers away from the Secretary of State, mostly due to the fact that the current Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, defied then President Trump by, refusing to find 11,780 votes or whatever it was that he claimed were missing. Mm-hmm. And so there has been a backlash on him. He has been punished. His role has now been gutted, basically, because he did not comply with, the person who is in charge of their party. And so another piece to that, though, is that So Georgia has 159 counties, second only to Texas, which is crazy because we're nowhere near the size of Texas. But each county has its own board of elections. They have people who administer and make certain decisions about elections, including whether or not to have Sunday voting, the timeframes for voting, and things like that. And so now we have seen over and over again throughout the state, many duly appointed members of these county election boards be removed. And, most of them look like me and you. And so that's, no coincidence that Black folks are being removed from these boards of elections. And so it's all a setup. It's all a part of the strategy that goes with, the big lie to make it easier for them to steal an election that they're going to lose, that they fear they're going to lose. Look.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, exactly. They're terrified. I mean, there's the only way you would do this much work if you're just terrified of losing. And no, you can't just go up to a group of people and convince them to vote the other way.
And it's crazy because I live here and I'm watching this happen, and it still boggles the mind that, we're living through this and that. We're watching this unfold and we're like, are you people really doing this? Is this really happening? I remember going and testifying at a committee last year regarding, all the voter suppression bills that had been introduced. And just prior to going down to the Capitol, for whatever reason, I went to the Secretary of State's website, the Elections Division, to just see if there was anything interesting on the website that, might help my argument be stronger for why we don't need all of these bills and, this and that and the third. The Secretary of State actually got an award in December of 2020 for administering safe and fair elections. If some national group, I can't find the press release because it's long been since removed from the website, but they actually got an award for the way that they administered elections and for, I don't want to say integrity because that's like a buzzword for them, but that it was, a fair election. It was safe. It was, it was a great election. And so he got an award for that. But yet and still, you felt the need to just unleash a barrage of bills that make it more difficult for certain people to vote.
Yeah.
That's the world we live in. That's our reality.
Yeah, that's absolutely nuts. So another important thing is it's bad to change all these voting laws when there's no actual proof there was voter fraud in the 2020 election or there's any widespread voting fraud just in general. And so Trump lost all his cases just about. He had over 100 cases. But the three biggest ones that involved Georgia was the Lynn Wood suit, where they contested the signature matching rules in an attempt to throw out votes. The judge ruled that since they only brought this up after the election, that it was invalid. If it was really a problem with the signature matching rules, they would have said something ahead of time. So they're trying to throw out more votes by signature matching, but the judge wouldn't let them do that. The Kraken suit that claimed that Dominion voting machines had there was a wide multinational conspiracy involving Dominion voting machines. The judge just dismissed the case. And then the Trump Schaefer suit claimed a large number of votes came from people under 18 and not on voting rolls. So election experts and election officials said there's no evidence for this. They presented no evidence. Trump's AG agreed, and the Georgia Supreme Court rejected the case. So the cases are so bad, they're not even going to trial.
No.
So if you concede all these voting laws based off no evidence, well, then going forward, they're just going to be throwing any old thing out and changing laws over it. And that's absolutely ridiculous. And there is no proof of widespread voter fraud. I mean, if I remember correctly, it was under 10 cases last year. And, all the people didn't convicted of the case, you know what I mean, that tried to vote twice or something. One of the cases, they actually proved the guy was senile and he literally forgot he had early voted. And that was that's a tenth of the cases then. I mean, it's just, it's mind boggling. And the thing of it is people are like, well, we've gotten better because we just don't have really blatantly racist literacy test, or there's no sign outside that says you can't vote. And it's just like, And, when you think about it, we've had to refight this like every generation. We had the right to vote after the Civil War, and then Jim Crow ended that. You know what I mean? And then we have to fight against Jim Crow in 65. And now we're almost back to the beginning with very targeted, specific attacks in the areas where Black votes really, really do matter. And can you expand on the danger of changing these laws with no proof there is any actual voting fraud?
Yeah. So this is all, again, predicated on the big lie. This is all quite obviously putting the pieces in place to steal future elections. That's really what this boils down to. And we know that this is happening because this country is becoming more and more diverse, seemingly every minute of every day. And we are very near to the point where people of color collectively will outnumber white people in the United States of America. And that scares many white people in the United States of America. They are fearful of what a country where the majority doesn't look like them will now have control and now have ruling power. They don't know what that means for them. They don't know, all the privileges that they enjoy and love so much. They fear they will be stripped away. And so they are doing all of this out of fear. They are doing all this to hold on to power. They feel power slipping through their fingers. And this is the only way they can stop it because they know Georgia has shown the whole entire country that when we have free and fair access to the ballot, and we can take advantage of all the different ways to participate in elections, we see what can happen. We see what will happen. Black people are roughly a third of the electorate in Georgia. Coupled with progressive white voters and other people of color, our Asian folk, our indigenous folks, our Latinx folks, we make up the majority. And we saw the tide turn in Georgia, not once for the president in the general in November, but 2 more times for the U.S. Senate in January. We saw some turnout of 5 million or so Black people in the general election. And then them Black folks, 92% of them have the nerve to come out and vote again on January 5th, 2021. So, here we are. Black people, we can also say, have gotten a taste of power too. We're like, wait a minute, hold up. This is what this looks like. This is what it feels like to win. I mean, at one point in time, when we're monitoring all of the numbers leading up to the runoff election, sometime about mid-December, I believe it was, we saw that there was some 250,000 requests for vote by mail ballots for the Senate runoff, 250,000 from people who did not vote in the general, who skewed or leaned Democrat. So, winning is contagious. Winning is fun. People want to be on a winning team. And once they saw it happen one time, they're like, well, I want to be a part of history the next time around. Oh, look, I got another shot in about a month. Well, I'm going to get in on some of this too. So yeah, it's contagious. People are like, dang, I didn't vote that first time, but I ain't going to miss out this time. We see what happens. And look, it's so crazy because, voting rights activists, we have these sort of canned statements and things that we always say, like, if we all vote together, if we all fight, we will win. That happened. If your vote wasn't powerful, they wouldn't be trying to take it from you. Well, that's happened because it is powerful and they are trying to take it. They've always been trying to take it, but we made it a little easier for them before. And now that, again, we've gotten this taste of victory, it's on. It is on and popping. We ready. We out here. We hitting these polling booths. We hitting this vote by mail. We hitting this early voting. And, white people are scared. Let's just be honest. They are scared.
Yeah. When January 6th happened, I was outside. I live a block away from the Capitol building. And so January 6th happened. My cousin calls me up. He's like, so where are you at? I'm like, and I was like, I'm at home, working from home. And he's like, you're not going outside, are you? I'm like, no, like, what's going on? And so I turned on the TV and they're running in the Capitol. And anyone who doesn't think that was a violent takeover, they had the plastic restraints and guns. And there was a plot to kidnap Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar. So like people trying to say it wasn't a violent thing. Maybe everybody there wasn't violent, but there was a group of guys trying to specifically kill women of color that were in power. Now you could just say they drew names out of a hat, and it just happened to be the 2 black women senators and it wasn't racial. It was just, they just drew the names out of the hat. And it was just 2 black women. Who knew? But I mean, that was some wild stuff. And, I was thinking about Reconstruction, and how the Klan, was attacking and bringing like this mob violence to thwart the political power of black people. And yes, it takes a different form this time. We're not at Colfax County, Louisiana, with shotguns trying to defend the courthouse. It's different this time. But I mean, it's the same. And right wing has always used mob violence as a tactic in the toolbox. Yeah. Always used mob violence as a tactic. And it's specifically brought on by government officials. You know what I mean? And they rile people up. And if something happens, it's these poor, low wealth white people that end up getting into trouble. And then the wealthy politicians and the wealthy people get to walk off scot-free. Nothing ever happens.
Their hands. Yeah.
And that's what the Klan was. You know what I mean? They sent these people out here that weren't going to amount to much. And then they, caused all this trouble and violence and stuff.
Yeah. It's funny, if I can just share with you briefly my own January 6th story. Woke up January 6th, first of all, well rested. So probably the first time in many, many years, I woke up the day after an election, having gotten a full good night's sleep. Because usually we're up till, 2, 3 in the morning waiting for election results to come in. But on, January 5th, when we went to bed, knowing pretty much the outcome. And we had done it. We had won. So the next day, I slept in a little, got up, well rested, didn't turn on the TV. I think I turned the TV on maybe in the morning just to make sure nothing crazy happened overnight, because we were still maybe a little unsure about Ossoff's seat, but we felt really good about Reverend Warnock's seat. Nothing really to report there. As long as it hadn't been overturned, I was good. Turned TV off, fiddled around the house for a while, and then went to the office. Didn't have the, CNN or anything on in the car, just had on, regular music, maybe some trap music or something was playing in the background. I don't know. It's feeling good. It was a good day. Went to the office, stayed there all day, didn't do anything exciting or didn't turn on any TVs, had no idea there was an insurrection happening at the Capitol the entire day. I literally was just walking around the office with my George Jefferson strut because, we had done the dang thing. We were good. Had no idea what was going on at the Capitol. None whatsoever. It was funny. We actually had an event that we did that we executed across the state on New Year's Eve that we called the Collard Green Caucus, where we actually, because one of the things we do at Black Voters Matter in engaging with our folks, because again we organize 365 days a year, not just when elections come up, because that's transactional and that's not who we are. So we lean into our culture. To work on our power building efforts, because that's what voting is. We lean into our culture to make authentic connections with our folks. And so, when we were thinking about the runoff, the end of the last day of early voting falling on New Year's Eve, we thought, what are we going to do to engage Black voters? What are we going to do to find our folks? And we were like, all right, what are Black people doing New Year's Eve? Well, we getting ready for the New Year's Day meal of collard greens and black eyed peas. And we said, okay, well, what if we give them the collard greens and the black eyed peas? We're like, all right, let's set up a whole thing. We know all these Black farmers across the state of Georgia, so we can easily get fresh collards. That's no big deal. Buy some cornbread and some black eyed peas. Yeah, we can do that. And then, we'll call it a collard green caucus. And so we purchased over 10,000 bunches of collard greens strictly from Black farmers. We posted up across 30 counties, either at or across the street from an early voting location. Told folks, come out, cast your early vote ballot, pick up your bag with your collard greens, your black eyed peas, and your cornbread. You got a food truck, a DJ, hang out with us for a while. Caucus with us. Let's talk about these issues and what's going on. And so, so going back to January 6th, we had some extra, black eyed peas and cornbread. I was literally staging pictures around the office, putting black eyed peas and cornbread on everybody's desk and taking pictures. while there was a whole insurrection happening at the Capitol, because I was oblivious. I was literally just living in bliss, being proud and happy of what Black people had done. We had shocked the world again. And so I had no idea January 6th was happening. And so it wasn't until January 7th that I was, late on the way home, called a friend. I was like, I think I heard something was going down in D.C. at the Capitol. You hear anything about it? Oh, I didn't hear anything about it either. When I get home, I'll probably turn on the TV. Didn't. Got home and watch NBA or something. Maybe watch Game of Thrones. I don't know what I watched, but I did not turn on the TV. So I didn't know until January 7th that January 6th had happened. And I was like, oh, dang, white people was big mad, huh? And then as I started watching, I was like, oh, shoot, people died? Wait a minute, what is going on? This is some crazy, bleep that happened, and I missed all of it because I was too busy walking around, basking in the glow of victory because, we had did the thing in Georgia.
Well, I mean, I did this little history lecture. I also do history lectures and not just interviews, talking about the Knights of the Golden Circle. And they actually had a plot in 1860 to stop Abraham Lincoln from getting ratified as president. So they were counting the votes in 1860. And Winfield Scott was in charge of security at the Capitol. And he was actually blocked by the Secretary of the Army back then, not Secretary of Defense, if I remember the term correctly. But the Secretary of the Army was from Virginia and blocked him getting troops to the Capitol. And so they knew the plot was happening for months ahead of time. And Winfield Scott hired the Pinkertons to infiltrate the plot. Well, when Virginia succeeded, the Secretary of the Army left to join the Confederacy. They put a Northern Secretary of the Army in, and they brought an artillery unit down to the Capitol. And that's what prevented a bunch of people from storming the Capitol to prevent Abraham Lincoln from getting inaugurated.
Wow. So white people storming the Capitol, not a new thing, huh?
Yeah. And
you say angry mobs of white people storming the Capitol. But again, that's one of those things where whatever, and I don't even remember. It might have been on one of the Black radio stations where they kind of mentioned it in between, whatever trap song of the day they were playing, and kind of just said something where I probably heard or interpreted, "Oh, white people are mad." So it's another day that ends in Y. Like, when aren't they mad? And thinking, yeah, they're real mad about what we did in Georgia. So, all right.
So, you made the news recently because Biden came down to Georgia and Black Voters Matter would not meet with them. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so we were a part of a coalition of organizations, including Asian Americans Advocacy Fund, GALEO, the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials, their C4 fund. We were partnered with Labor. Our folks in labor, just a group of progressive organizations who got together, who've been in community and worked on voting rights and other things for years now, got together and said, President Biden, sir, with all due respect, we would actually rather that you not come to Atlanta to make this speech. Because you're literally preaching to the choir. In some regards, we understood why he would come to ground zero for voter suppression to make this speech. But we felt that his time would have been better spent making that speech on the Senate floor, because those are the people you need to move. Those are the people who stand in the way of voting rights protection. And so we felt it was a little disingenuous, quite frankly, for him to come and make that speech. Especially when we know that there is real work still happening on the ground. Like, we are in the midst of legislative session. We've known for weeks now that Republicans have pre-filed legislation that will ban all drop boxes in the state of Georgia. Ban. There will be no more drop boxes for vote by mail ballots. Also, at that same time that the speech was delivered here in Atlanta, there were people on the ground in Lincoln County collecting signatures to submit to their Board of Elections to stop them from closing 7 of their 8 polling precincts. So we felt that the visit was, a time for another speech and for photo ops. And quite frankly, as activists and organizers, we don't have time for that. We are literally still in the throes of fighting voter suppression. We took a lot of backlash on social media from well-meaning people who thought that we were being divisive and that we weren't standing in support of our president. Quite frankly, it's not our job to stand in support of any elected official. We stand with the people. And I feel like if most of those people knew what we knew about what was going on in Lincoln County, they wouldn't be, they wouldn't be as mad at us. They would understand our perspective. And I also think that, one of the things that I learned from the social media backlash is that, in this country, we are afraid of accountability in a lot of ways, because what we were saying to the president, the message that we were delivering is, we need you to come out stronger in support of our voting rights and to have an actual plan. And so, that speech was the first time that he gave, the full throated endorsement of making changes to the filibuster. It's the first time that he gave a strongly worded statement that said the filibuster is a barrier to getting voting rights in this country. And so we were very pleased to hear that. We are thankful that he finally came out and made that statement. But, in the days leading up to that visit, we were not happy about it. We really weren't.
Do you feel like Biden and the Biden administration has done enough to protect voting rights?
No, I don't. It was interesting. One of the things that the president said during that speech is that he had been having quiet conversations for 2 months. That was absolutely shocking to me. I was like, for 2 months, this has been a priority. The Senate was delivered in January of 2021. That should have been a conversation you started having right after inauguration. What do you mean for 2 months you've been having these quiet conversations? You gave a speech in Philadelphia back in the summer that, quite frankly, was weak, was very weak. It was not strongly in favor of needing protection for voting rights. But so for 2 months prior to the visit, you suddenly found a sense of urgency for voting rights protection from the federal government. That is disappointing, if I'm being honest. The administration has prioritized a lot of things over the last year. Obviously, COVID is something that needed to be worked on. And yes, we needed infrastructure. So we needed, the American Rescue Plan. We need Build Back Better. We are in favor of all of those things. And also voting rights. But for us, it should be voting rights, also American Rescue Plan and Build Back Better and all of those other things. And so voting rights have always been a priority for us, and they always will be until we get them.
Exactly. I was upset that the first order of business from the Biden agenda wasn't ending the filibuster. This idea that you're going to get Republicans to come over, I don't see how you could be Barack Obama's vice president. And, Barack Obama actually would capitulate completely. And then the Republicans would just change their position. Like, if you went through all that and you still thought Republicans were going to help you out do anything, I don't see how you are literally that naive after 40 years in politics. I mean, these Republicans have been just completely obstructionist since before Obama, really.
Yeah, and they're not shy about it. We know who they are. They've shown us who they are and what they will do to advance their own agenda. Look, I do not like Mitch McConnell. Let me be clear on the record in saying that. I have little to no respect for him. But one thing I will acknowledge, that man knows how to use power. When he had it, he had no qualms about using it. He didn't care what norms or protocols he may have stepped on. He didn't care if he was out of line. He didn't care if he ruffled feathers or hurt feelings. He did not care. He pushed forward judges. That was his, lone agenda, I suppose, because that's really all he did. Because, that's what his party and his, donors wanted him to do. And so that's what he did. So it is very frustrating for us to sit back and watch Democrats be afraid to use power that, quite frankly, we gave them in Georgia, where we risked our lives to get people out to vote during a pandemic, long before there were any vaccines. We only had hand sanitizer, masks, and social distancing. That's all we had. But we were out there telling people to come and vote. And, so it's very frustrating to see, them not use the power that we fought so hard to give them. Again, patted on the head, treated like the stepchild, I forget what you call it. The child out of wedlock that nobody knows about, that they want to keep hidden in the back, not prioritizing us and our issues, our community, not acknowledging our humanity. It's all, part and parcel for the Democratic Party. And, over the summer, and I'm glad, and whoever it was, shout out to whoever that nameless person is who changed those talking points and told Democrats to stop saying, voting rights advocates are going to just have to work a little harder, register a few more people to vote, and get a few more folks out to the polls. That was so disrespectful, because what do you think we've been doing? We've never not done that. We've never had the luxury to stop doing that. We have continuously done that, and we did not let up. In fact, we went harder during a deadly pandemic where we saw people, colleagues, friends, loved ones that we know die. When I saw you in D.C. on January 6th, I mentioned the name of a lady from Albany, Georgia, Pinky Modesti. God rest her soul. Loved the city of Albany, loved Southwest Georgia, was an amazing organizer. We saw her in December on one of our bus trips down to Albany. She did not live to see the results of January 5th. She did not get to see history being made in her home state. And so that's the reality that we were up against during that time. So many of our colleagues and comrades came down with COVID. And back then, COVID was still hugely a death sentence. We didn't know if people were going to make it. But we still continued to press forward. In some ways, I don't know, stupidly maybe, risking our lives. But we did that work. And so for us to be here over a year later to see that you're still not using that power, you still won't come back and protect our right to vote is maddening. At some point, honestly, I really thought self-preservation would kick in. Like, you gotta know, if you can't get Black people out to the polls, you're not gonna hold this power. You're not gonna have control of the Senate. I gotta believe that if nobody else is pushing this real hard, it's gotta be the majority leader, Senator Schumer, because he's going to go back to being minority leader if they don't get this done. That is just a fact. And so there are remedies on the table. There are options available. And so that's the other part of our frustration is it's not like you need to create something. It's not like you got to scramble and come up with a plan. You've got the legislation, and then you've got the carve out of the filibuster, which you just carved out, did a carve out for finance, for the budget ceiling. And we've seen Mitch McConnell do it for worse, right? It's not like we're talking about gun rights or abortion rights. We are talking about voting rights, the most fundamental right of every American citizen and the bedrock, the most important pillar that holds up this very now fragile democracy in the United States of America.
I mean, it's, and one of the things I loved about your speech, you said that next time, if you don't really come out and go to bat for us and protect us, next time Black people might not be there. And part of that will be they're not motivated. And part of it will be we just can't come out. There will be people, if you don't have Saturday, Sunday voting, if you don't have that weekend voting and that Sunday voting, they're not going to be able to vote. Everybody doesn't have mobility like that. If you're an elderly person, that souls to the polls, that bus might have been your only ride to the polling station. Everybody doesn't have family and grandkids like that.
Yeah.
So, they're really, when we keep them a national party, if we go away, if we stop voting, it becomes a coastal party, the Democratic Party. So I don't understand what, why they're doing it like that. And go ahead.
I wanted to just share some numbers with you from the municipal elections in Georgia back in November. We saw that there were 645. Now, mind you, this is a municipal election, so turnout is very, very low. Nothing on the level of what we saw in 2020. But we saw 645 vote by mail ballots canceled or rejected because they were late on arrival. And we saw another 465 canceled or rejected because they had some issues with the voter ID. So they probably didn't have the photocopy, or it wasn't legible, or it was, not clear. So, that's a little over 1,000 votes. You can rest assured that you can add 2 zeros to that number next year at the end of that number. So now we're looking at, if my math is right, or if I got a little glimpse of a crystal ball, that'd be a little over 11,000 votes. What was that number on that infamous phone call? Find me 11,000 something or other votes. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, right? But this is real simple math that we're looking at here. And if they don't do something, to your point, in DC, I said, when you find yourself in trouble, you find yourself in peril, and you call Black voters, don't be surprised when we don't answer. And you just gave a multitude of reasons about why we might not answer. It might be because you did not center our needs. You did not do the things that we asked you to do. You did not do the things you promised that you would do. Or quite simply, we no longer have a path to the ballot box. Our vote by mail ballots are now being rejected. Our polling precincts are continuing to close. You keep changing the times and the locations of where and how we vote. So it is going to be that much more difficult for us to come and ride in and save the day like we always do. So you were warned. You can't say we didn't tell you, because we have, and
Another thing I loved about your interview, I watched a couple of your interviews for this one, and you said that the best way to convince someone to vote isn't to shame them and say that people died for you to vote, like actually explaining to them how their vote matters. And you use the example of Albany, Georgia, and they have a utilities commission picked by the county commissioners. And so there was a storm apparently in Albany, Georgia, and the utility prices went through the roof. And you explained to people how if you had better county commissioners, they could have prevented this from happening or relieve your debt. And I was like, wow, that's really good. And I love that about your interviewing. It's like, just one thing I dislike about the left, they focus too much on shaming as a negative tactic and not so much on positive tactics. Like, I feel like you get more people by saying with the honey, like saying, oh, you could have lower utility prices. Mm-hmm. You could have free college at the state level. I mean, if you had the right group of people. I mean,
yeah. I don't think we don't do a good job of incentivizing people to become a part of the process, right? We don't show them what power they have and how it is that they can use this system to their benefit. Oftentimes, you're right. Voting rights advocates and organizers would lean into, people died for you to have the right to vote. And while that is meaningful to some folks, look, especially after watching George Floyd die on Facebook, Black death has, in a lot of ways, become normalized. And that's very sad for me to say and acknowledge that, but that's true. So that no longer motivates and moves people to be a part of the process. But if you can connect dots to issues in a community, then now you're getting genuine buy-in from people who see voting and civic engagement as a means to change and not doing it out of some blind obligation because you guilted or you shamed me into doing it. And quite frankly, that's not sustainable. Because look, if I'm making, a minimum wage in Georgia, $5.15 an hour, or even if I'm fortunate enough to have a job where I might make $7 or $9 an hour, I'm not standing in line for 8-9 hours to vote. When that's 8-9 hours, I'm not on the clock making money to feed my family, to keep those lights on with those high utility bills, or, to be at home, washing clothes, helping my child with homework, or just sitting on the couch drinking a beer, whatever I want to be doing for 8 hours other than standing in line, which, by the way, in Georgia, early voting for the past several years has been adversely affected by climate change. In 2016 in Gwinnett County, you had people one of the largest and fastest growing counties in the state. You had one early voting location, which is the government building. And so people are in line in the parking lot to get inside the government building. So now you're on this asphalt jungle, using the barricades. The line looks like the line for the ride of roller coasters at Six Flags. And you have people who passed out because it was so hot because of climate change. So, we are in a real, precarious state when it comes to a lot of issues that could be prevented if more people had access to the ballot and if they understood the actual power of their vote. And, ironically, climate change is one of the things we could address if we had, folks of that mindset who were coming to vote and picking candidates around that issue.
Again, left-leaning voters are more COVID averse. So having these long lines and stuff is another suppression tactic. It's layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. Another thing, have you heard about anybody trying to make new criteria for Section 4B that's more recent? Because I think that's the ultimate solution to me. Make a new bill that specifically addresses the 4B criteria. Is anybody talking about that?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not. But, that could be one of the things that comes out of, a new tactic that I'm hearing coming out of DC, where instead of putting through the entire bill, start breaking up aspects of the bill and putting things through one at a time. At this point, I want a debate, quite frankly, because I want the cowards to not be able to hide behind procedures and rules, right? I want them to be on the record with what it is that they're opposing. And so maybe with this vote, maybe that opens up, that kind of strategic thinking about how we can get around some of these barriers to voting.
Well, I heard people saying that before Biden even got in with Build Back Better, to take it in pieces, because when you do it in a big chunk, they jump up and say it's $10 trillion. But they don't tell you it's $10 trillion over 20 years. And we're expected to spend $10.5 trillion to mitigate those problems.
Yeah.
So
yeah. No, and I had not. I think I did hear that with Build Back Better because of the price tag. So trying to make the dollars a little more palatable. But I hadn't heard it for voting rights until recently. So I thought it was an interesting tactic. And so perhaps something good will come out of that. I don't know, but if nothing else, I want people to be exposed. Because the other prevailing thought is that it's not just Manchin and Sinema, or Manchinema, as I like to call them. It's not just those two. There are others who have issues with either making changes to the filibuster or just parts of these bills in general. But they're silent. They can hide behind Manchinema because they're the ones who are out front and very vocal about it. And so, look, some of these other procedures that start to happen are going to start to reveal and show other people in their true light. So it's an interesting time coming these next few months. Look, I'm going to still keep doing what I do, organizing Black people, being in community with Black people, building power of Black people, 365 days a year. We are not here just for elections. We've got so many other things that we need to be looking at, criminal justice reform, environmental justice, food autonomy, healthcare, access to healthcare. My goodness, our school boards are under attack. There's been, decades of siphoning money away from public schools to, private options and all these other, things that they want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's just diverting money from public schools, where most of our children are. So, we've got a whole multitude of things to organize around, and other ways to build power, because, voting is just one way to build power. And so we are continuing with our work at Black Voters Matter 365 days a year. And at the same time, still fighting for voting rights. So we'll continue to get arrested. We'll continue to take to the streets. We'll continue to press elected officials. We will continue. We're revamping our corporate accountability campaign that we started in Georgia. When we learned that the authors of our voter suppression bills are being funded by some of the largest companies in the state of Georgia, some of the largest employees. And so, we've using the same tactic in Arizona, calling out the corporations that fund Senator Sinema. So, on all fronts, we'll continue to work. One of our sayings over here at Black Voters Matter is can't stop, won't stop. We ain't about to stop now. But at the same time, we're also still organizing with our folks on these issues that affect our lives every single day as Black people in America.
Yes. And one last question. There are people in the ADOS movement who are trying to say that the voting rights push is a Trojan horse to increase the amount of undocumented people voting. I think that's a ridiculous claim because by definition, an undocumented person couldn't get voter registration because you have to have documentation to get voter registration. So somebody who had questionable legal status would never even be in this conversation to begin with. So as one of the leading voting rights organizers, do you understand of any plans to increase undocumented people voting? Have you any bills being proposed for that? Is anybody talking about that in the meetings you've gone to?
No, I've not heard any conversations around such. No,
I have to ask because I have a lot of ADOS followers, ADOS movement followers, so I got to ask. But I always thought that was a ridiculous statement because by definition, to have a voter registration card, you have to have documentation. And if you were here with a questionable legal status, the last thing you'd want to do is tell everybody exactly where you live.
Yeah.
They have one thing. This one guy, TD Hip Hop, he brought up a city ordinance in New York City that said that someone could vote after staying there 30 days straight, which how many people are going to take advantage of that? And most of the people voting in that area are already immigrants. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they'd never bring enough evidence for me to actually go in depth to debunk it. So I figured this will suffice to debunk it. All right. I really appreciate your time with me as a struggling blogger. I love what we were able to do here, actually make a comprehensive video about everything going on in Georgia. Before we leave, tell everyone how to find you on social media and everybody how to donate to Black Voters Matter.
Thank you. And let me just also say, I definitely want to end on a high note. A lot of the stuff we discussed today was a little bit heavy. In Georgia, during this past municipal election cycle, we saw a continued record turnout of Black voters for municipal races, right? So nothing like we saw in 2020 or 2021 for the runoff. But when you compare numbers from previous municipal races, we're continuing to see record numbers, which says to me that, Black people are still living in our power. We're still basking in the collective power that we have as a community, that we see how, this voting thing can translate into power. I like to highlight the city of Brunswick, which we all know is the home of Ahmaud Arbery. They saw a 100% increase in turnout for their municipal race versus the last time they had municipal elections. And they had a runoff for mayor and an at-large city council seat. And again, versus the last time they had a runoff election, they saw a 100% increase in turnout. So Black people are still believing in the power of voting. It was not a fluke 2020 or 2021 in Georgia. This is now a part of our culture, if you will, this understanding and belief that when we collectively flex our power, our voting muscle is strong and it's enough to change, really any election. So I'm excited about what we saw. For us, Black Voters Matter Fund, we're a nonpartisan organization. I want to mention that. But the partners, the people that we work with on the ground, had an interest in 12 elections last year in November. And I'm happy to report we were 12 for 12. We saw a lot of first-time Black mayors all across the city, all across the state. We saw county commissioners. We saw city council. We saw utility board. We saw district attorneys. So we won a variety of seats. We are continuing to build power all across Georgia in spite of a new round of voter suppression bills that were signed into law in the summer. We still showed up and showed out, as our grandmothers and them like to say. So, in spite of everything that goes on in DC and all the happenings, I still put all of my faith and trust in Black voters because we are resilient. We are amazing. We are powerful, and we are starting to really understand and reconcile what that power means. So, again, Black voters are everything, and I give them all my love and respect. As far as how to reach us, we are across all social media platforms, Black Voters with an S, Black Voters MTR. Again, across all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You won't find me on the TikTok, though. I ain't with that yet. But you can find us there. You can go to our website, blackvotersmatterfund.org. You can find a link to donate to either our C4 or our C3 organization, our 501c3. And, just follow us on social and see what we're up to. Look, this fight is not over. We lost this most recent round, but the fight continues. We are still in this to win this. I'm just going to tease up that February 21st is John Lewis's birthday. So look for some activity around voting rights around that time. But again, you got to follow us on social to keep up and to see what we have going next. So again, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Black Voters Matter, 365 days a year, every day, everywhere, and we can't stop, won't stop.
Great. I would like to thank you, and that ends our session here at Black Leadership Analysis.